everyone for coming out tonight for our fourth History Talk of the year. We are thrilled to welcome an out-of-stater to our local Champaign County History Museum to talk about the history of one of our local railroads, the Havana, Rantoul, and Eastern, better known as the Punkin Vine. Our speaker tonight is Mike Seipel. He is a railroad historian from Rogers, Arkansas that serves as president of the Arkansas-Boston Mountains chapter of the National Railway Historical Society in Springdale. A native of Rogers, Mike is a graduate of Arkansas Tech University and Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. He taught at the University of Arkansas for 15 years and developed the Whistle Stops West Elder Hostel program, the Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City by rail. Mike is a member of the National Railway Historical Society, the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society, the Kansas and City Southern Historical Society, and the Heart of the Heartlands Railroad Museum. He also is founder and moderator of the Arkansas Railroad History and KCS Railway History Facebook pages. Mike frequently presents railroad history programs like this one for museums around the Midwest and other organizations. Mike and his wife Pam live in Rogers and have 5 adult children and 6 wonderful grandchildren. Let's now welcome Mike, and we'll have some fun.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate that invitation. Well, good evening. Glad you all came out tonight to hear a little bit about history, about the railroads. You're probably wondering, how does an Arkansas guy end up in Champaign, Illinois, talking about Illinois railroad history? I didn't grow up in Illinois, but my father did. And we always came up here. My father was from the Farmer City area. My mother was from the Ottawa, Illinois area. So we constantly came up to Illinois. And from a young boy, I was interested in trains. Anytime there was a train, I wanted to see the train. Well, my dad started telling me stories. Obviously, this is Illinois Central country right here. And he was telling me stories about the Illinois Central. He had purchased a few books. I remember when I was just barely old enough to read, I was reading, some about the main line of Mid-America, the Illinois Central. But he also told me about this railroad that went in the back of his farm where he was born. He was born on a farm in December of 1924 in a huge ice storm in a little community called Glen Avon, Illinois, which is really close to Bellflower or Farmer City. And there was a railroad that went in the back of his property, and he called it the Punkin Vine. And I can remember, I never, ever saw a train on the Punkin Vine, but I can remember he would stop, even when I was 5 years old, he would stop and there at a place called Lorette on Highway 54, I believe it was. He would stop right there at the crossing and he'd say, now look at those tracks, and these tracks are like this. They're not very straight. And he said, that's the Punkin Vine. Well, my dad passed away in 2009, but I just got more and more interested in it, and I am a railroad historian. So I want to tell you a story tonight. I've been working on this for years, and I want to tell you the story of the Punkin Vine, which was known by the Illinois Central Railroad as the Rantoul District. It's a 76-mile line that ran from West Lebanon, Indiana, just across the Indiana line, all the way to LeRoy, Illinois, where it connected with the Big Four. And so tonight, I'm just going to show you this picture. This is the guy that inspired me, my father, Robert Seipel. The story begins with a man named Benjamin Gifford, who lived from 1840 to 1913. He was a lawyer in Rantoul. He was born near Plano, Illinois on April 5th, 1840. He served under General Grant in the Civil War. He was wounded twice at Vicksburg and was promoted to lieutenant for his bravery. After the war, Gifford was known for building ditches. That's how he made his money, to drain 7,500 acres in Champaign County. He was known as the Swamp King. He married a lady named Miss Laura Etta Martindale in November 1865. He moved to Rantoul 1868 to set up his law practice. And the story goes like this. Mr. Gifford planned the Shortline as a rival to the Illinois Central because he had lost out on a controversy with the Illinois Central over some freight rates. He felt like they were charging too much. So he decided he was going to create his own east-west Shortline. In fact, in Rantoul, they didn't call it the Punkin Vine, they called it the Rantoul Shortline. So a group of Rantoul men formed a corporation on January 1st, 1873 to construct a railroad. Now this railroad would be a narrow gauge railroad. Now this is not a picture of it. This picture was taken in Mexico actually. But if you look on the right, that big locomotive, that's standard gauge. That's your 4 foot, 8.5 inch distance from rail to rail. That's your standard gauge like you see today with the Amtrak trains here. Okay, this is a narrow gauge locomotive. Now compare the distance of the rails. I'm not sure exactly what distance that one was, but the one that Gifford built was a 3 foot gauge. 3 foot gauge. Okay, and Gifford was an advocate for building narrow gauge versus standard gauge. At this time in history, and we're talking 1874, 1875, he believed a narrow gauge railroad could be built for not over 2/3 the cost of a standard gauge. And one of his associates named Augustine Wright expressed the view that the narrow gauge was safer than the standard gauge on the belief that the lighter equipment operating at a lower speed and with a lower center of gravity had less potential for inflicting damage. So he, along with some others in the state of Illinois, kind of bought into this narrow gauge movement. Now, this is what's called a railroad pass. Back in the day, railroad officials would have these available to exchange with other railroads. Hey, I can ride the Illinois Central, you give me your pass, I'll give you my pass, and you can ride when you want. It's good for 1 year, you can ride the Havana, Rantoul, and Eastern. So that was the name of the railroad as it was begun. So on April 1st, 1873, it was officially chartered in the state of Illinois. Originally, it was known to the locals as the Dinky. Now, it might have been known as the Dinky simply because it was small, narrow gauge, as opposed to standard gauge. Much smaller equipment. It could handle tighter curves. It could handle steeper grades, which really wasn't a problem here. But it was not like it is in Arkansas, where I live. But the line was proposed to build westward all the way to Havana, Illinois, on the Illinois River to connect with another narrow gauge that had already been built over there called the Fulton County Narrow Gauge Railway. That extension never happened. The financial panic of 1873 had hit the United States pretty hard, and it was not easy to secure the needed capital to finance this new railroad. So he created an intensive subscription campaign, and the whole proposed line resulted in securing $149,000. Now remember, this is 1873 money. That's a lot of money, from several hundred subscribers. So by June 1875, he had raised enough funds to begin construction of the line. And again, it was cheaper to construct than standard gauge. Now here's a railroad map that just shows the line I've highlighted in yellow. And you can see West Lebanon on the far right edge of the screen. And this is Dewey, Fisher, Dickerson, Rantoul right here. So just to give you some perspective. Construction work was begun under a man named John Hinckley, who was the chief engineer. And by January 1st, 1876, the narrow gauge railroad, as I said, 3 foot railroad, 3 foot in width, was completed between Alvin and Fisher by December 1st, 1878, and 12 miles from Alvin to West Lebanon was completed. Actually, the first one was 1876, and then the 12 miles from Alvin to West Lebanon was completed in 1878. Now this just shows the western part of the line this is showing from Fisher to LeRoy. And you can see the line was pretty straight, except when it got to a place called Lotus and got to Lorette, that's on Highway 54, it started heading a bit north to Glenavon, where my father was born, Sabina, and then terminated in LeRoy. So by 1879, the Punkin narrow gauge was in full operation. Now, the line was projected to be connected to the Fulton County Narrow Gauge Railroad, which was also known as the Spoon River Peavine. They all had nicknames, in Havana. And this line was built between Galesburg and West Havana around 1880. So it was projected to meet up. They were going to have this big narrow gauge empire again. Financial conditions did not allow that to ever be completed. Recently, I just came across some photos of the earliest equipment. The original rolling stock of the Havana, Rantoul, and Eastern consisted of 2 narrow gauge locomotives, 2 passenger cars, and 88 freight cars. They were rather diminutive little locomotives, as you can see, and here's a picture of probably their most modern locomotive, number 3. And it looks like in this photo that this may actually be a wood-burning locomotive. Early steam locomotives were wood burners. Later, many became coal burners, especially in coal country like Illinois. And then later, toward the end of the steam era, many became oil burners. So this is one of their early locomotives. Now, there was a robber baron, one of the robber barons of the era, J. Gould, intersected with the Punkin vine in this manner. By 1880, only a year after it went into full operation, Mr. Gifford began looking for a way to get out from under his holdings. So maybe he just got tired of it, or he saw that, you know, maybe he felt like financial conditions were such he needed to spin it off. So he offered to sell his stock to the Illinois Central, but the Illinois Central refused. Of course, he had bought it kind of to spite the Illinois Central, so maybe some bad blood there, I'm not sure. So he turned to Jay Gould, the great financier who controlled the Wabash and St. Louis Railroad and succeeded in getting the Havana, Rantoul, and Eastern merged in with the Wabash. So for the next 6 years, the Punkin vine would be under Wabash control from about 1881 to 1887. Here is a official guide listing of timetable of the line, and while it was under the control of the Wabash, St. Louis, and Pacific. This is May 15th, 1881. Mixed trains daily, except on Sundays. 76-mile line to LeRoy from West Lebanon. It was a 6-hour, 10-minute trip. Now I know today you're thinking, oh my goodness, I could drive that in a fraction of that time. But remember, this is before improved roads. This is before automobiles. So this was lightning fast, I'm sure. And they'll ask me, how did it get the name the Punkin vine? And I don't have a firm answer on that. Some say it's because the vine maybe was slow in growth. Maybe that's part of it. It wandered from place to place, even though if you look at the map, it looks like a straight line. I did learn, though, that there were several other railroads in the United States that also had some kind of vine in their name, including Punkin vine. So it wasn't an uncommon name.
The Punkin vine, I'm from Fisher.
From Fisher, on the Punkin vine. Right.
But the story around there was the fact that when the train was going down the railroad track, it wandered.
Oh, okay.
It said it's like a pumpkin vine.
Okay.
That's
there you
the
go.
story they was telling.
There you go. I've heard several variations, and that's a good one. Yeah, especially toward the end when the track was so bad, the train would rock. Yeah, yeah.
I can remember. Yeah, I lived right by it.
Here is an 1885 timetable. 2 trains each way, except on Sundays. They had what was called an accommodation train, and basically that's a local train that stops at all or nearly all the stops along the line for passengers and freight. So that would be the slower train for sure. On the right is June 18th, 1885 Bloomington pantograph schedule. Well, after 6 years or so, the Wabash defaulted on its bonds and was sold at auction in Springfield for $100,000 to the Hill Harriman interest of the Illinois Central. And they negotiated the Illinois Central to operate the Havana, Rantoul, and Eastern under lease, and they had this agreement. So the Illinois Central accepted that, and in June 1887 took control of the road, which then took the official title for a time, the Rantoul Railroad Company, just a short time under that name, which was really controlled by the Illinois Central. So it's really all Illinois Central, which you can see all the different Illinois Central logos here. But here's the problem. Illinois Central is standard gauge. Havana, Rantoul, and Eastern is narrow gauge. You have a problem on interchange. So when they would come to towns to interchange with other railroads, they would literally have to transload by hand the cars, which took a lot of time, a lot of labor, and it was very costly. And if they had built as standard gauge, they may not have been in receivership so quickly. But they did remedy that. When the Illinois Central got a hold of them in June 1887, it wasn't long before they converted the entire railroad to standard gauge. In fact, the story says that it was an odd sight to see the trains operating in the interim changeover, because the standard gauge tracks were laid outside the narrow gauge rails so that you could run both the old smaller locomotives and the newer cars. And so it looked a little odd there for a while, but it eventually all became standard gauge. By May 19th, 1937, this is an Illinois Central timetable showing just the Rantoul to LeRoy segment. And notice instead of having times, it says irregular service. So really and actually I've got a date here in a minute I'll share with you, but it's sometime in 1931 that they quit running regularly scheduled passenger trains. Now what you could do was ride on the caboose. And I did this presentation in Rantoul on Tuesday night, and I had someone in the presentation say, oh yes, back in the 1950s we would go to school in Fisher, and we would just flag them down. They would slow down or stop, and we just get on the caboose and they let us ride. So even though there really wasn't passenger service beyond 1931, there kind of sort of was. Here's a timetable. This is one of the last I have. This is 1974. You can see the line has been truncated from LeRoy to Potomac, which now there's only 52 miles of line instead of the original 76 miles of line. Now, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to take you on a trip. We're going to do a 76-mile trip very quickly, very quickly. So we're going to start out in West Lebanon, Indiana. This is the Wabash Depot. Remember, that's where they connected with the Wabash, and Jay Gould had controlled the Wabash. And so this was their connection where they could run from Rantoul to the Wabash. They didn't have to worry about dealing with the Illinois Central. Okay, you kind of see the game plan here. This is located in Pike Township in Warren County, Indiana. The Wabash was the first railroad to reach West Lebanon in 1856. Today it's the Norfolk Southern line, I believe, that goes to Detroit. Pike County, 1877 map. You can see this is the Wabash coming across here, but I've highlighted in yellow and it says MARW extension. You're probably wondering, what is the MARW? Well, in the state of Indiana, they had to charter the railroad under the laws of Indiana, and so they called it the Mississippi and Atlantic Railroad Company. Where in the world they came up with that, I don't know, but they had bold visions. It was 8.5 miles long, and so this is the Mississippi and Atlantic Railroad extension in Indiana. It was the Punkin Vine. This is just a Google Earth map. This shows the Wabash, which is now the Norfolk Southern, still very active line. But this is where I traced out, because they actually abandoned this segment in the late 1930s. So there's not much left, and sometimes people call me a railroad archaeologist. I go kick in the dirt to see where stuff used to be. But here's a Punkin Vine freight train with Illinois Central locomotive on a siding facing west and West Lebanon. So that's the freight train probably getting ready to take off and go all the way, certainly to Rantoul and probably to LeRoy. Here's one of the first places in Indiana after West Lebanon was a place called Sloan, Indiana. It's where the Punkin Vine once crossed the New York Central at an interlocking tower that was called Tower NX. It was on what was called the New York Central's Egyptian line. The mechanical interlocking, which the tower here was installed in 1906, and it closed in the mid-1930s. But on April 7th, 1937, the 6 miles of the Punkin Vine was abandoned between West Lebanon and Hedrick. And then later, on Valentine's Day of 1943, another 2.4 miles of the line was abandoned between Hedrick and the Illinois-Indiana state line. So by 1943, they're not running into Indiana at all. This place called Sloan, though, where they crossed, it was pretty interesting. It had the tower, It had the water spout for the locomotives. We're looking north on the Illinois Central. The Punkin Vine would have crossed right in between the tower and the building there. This is in the 1950s, so the Punkin Vine was already removed by this time, but you can see the water tower, you can see the tower and the train order board there. Again, just some photos that showed up. If you look on Google Earth today, it's in the middle of a cornfield, and you would never know one railroad was there, let alone two. So it's an empire that has disappeared. Hedrick, Indiana is our next stop. This town was established on July 31st, 1881. The town once had an elevator, drugstore, schoolhouse, and a post office until 1959. Not much there now, but I did come across some historic photos. The depot sign there says LeRoy is 68 miles and West Lebanon is 6 miles. So they put that on all the signs early on. Unfortunately, a tornado nearly destroyed the entire town on April 17th, 1922. And it killed 4 residents, injured a bunch of folks. And I do want you to notice, if you look closely on the right side of this photograph, you'll see a locomotive and a caboose. So the rail is there, but their depot, that nice little depot you just saw, that's what a tornado did to it. The next place we're going to cross is at Knowles, and we're now into Illinois. After passing a place called Thomas Station, Indiana, at milepost 8.3, and by the way, when I'm giving you milepost numbers, we're going from West Lebanon to LeRoy. So 8.3 miles from West Lebanon, we're traveling west. The Punkin Vine once crossed the Milwaukee Road at a place called Knowles in Vermilion County. So you can see Vermilion County here, and Knowles is going to be right in here. Knowles is not a town. It was just a place on the railroad that, once again, it's obliterated now, and there's nothing left there. But here's, they had a tower. This might not have been their tower because I haven't been able to find a definitive photo of it, but they had a tower, something like that, where they crossed the Milwaukee Road. So the next place they're coming into is at milepost 12.35 is the town of Alvin. Now, Alvin was originally spelled Alvan, A-L-V-A-N. Today it's spelled A-L-V-I-N, but it was named after a prominent landowner in the area. This is a 1915 Vermilion County plat showing the crossing of the two railroads. So here's the Punkin Vine, and here's the crossing with the Chicago and Eastern Illinois. What's really interesting about this town is they had the interlocking tower at major crossings, so the tower personnel could be up high where they could see approaching traffic and make sure two trains didn't have a cornfield meet. But then you've got the Union Station over to the right, and that was the Punkin Vine is this line going across, and we're looking at the Chicago and Eastern Illinois right here. The tower was closed in 1943. This again shows Alvin at the Union Depot. The Union Depot and that tower were built in 1893. Now, it's kind of fun to look at some of the old pictures of the towns, actually. This would have been the downtown area of Alvin pre-1910. And because you had two railroads crossing there, you would have the customary hotel. This is the Junction House Hotel. It says, the sign, I was able to kind of pick out what the word said. It says Junction House Hotel, Restaurant, and Bakery in Alvin. It was there right by the depot, right by the tracks. That bakery must have smelt good, I imagine. This is coming out of Alvin now. There was a big trestle. There were low spots, as you know the topography around here. There were low spots, so they had little bridges, and then they had sometimes some tall bridges. And here's a trestle just west of Alvin. A local who lived in Alvin said this trestle was removed in 1942 after they quit using that portion of the line. The next place is Henning, a village in South Ross Township, Vermilion County. The railroad came through this place in 1879. A man named John Putnam purchased 10 acres of land from the railroad, and the town was later established there. The town's name was named after the maiden name of one of the residents. So when the Havana, Rantoul, and Eastern came through, a gentleman from Pontiac, Illinois, bought 10 acres of land from E.S. Pope, the E.S. Pope estate for the town site, named it Henning in honor of his wife's maiden name. So a lot of these towns that sprung up, their names are connected to the railroad or somebody they loved connected to it. This depot at Henning would later be moved, and I don't know this for a fact, I'm still going to have to do some newspaper research, but after they closed this portion of the line, this depot I believe was put on a flat car and taken to Sabina. And this depot would have been the last depot in Sabina that stood in Sabina. Potomac. Well, actually before Potomac, there was a place called Rayville. I don't have any photo of the depot, so I can't tell you much about it. So now we're in Potomac at milepost 2258. Station was located west of Vermilion Street and north of State Street on the south side of the track. And there are some historic photos of Potomac that have shown up. Here's one. This is undated, Potomac Depot, an elevator looking west. There's a sign here, and I'm just in studying these historic photographs, I try to guess what era this might be, because a lot of these photographs, they never wrote the date on them. But I'm going to guess this is around World War I, and I'm going to guess this board right here is probably a name of all the men that have gone off to war. Yeah. That's just a guess. But a lot of these, this is what's called a real picture postcard. And the railroads would do this often. Photographers would do this. They would turn their photos into postcards and then sell them along the line. So that's just a real photo postcard. Here's what, looking west on State Street in Potomac, this is what the town looked like in 1907. Notice the automobile. You don't see a lot of other automobiles there, probably still a lot of horse and buggies, but that's looking west on State Street in Potomac. Here's another photo. This one's actually around 1895 at Potomac. With the passenger train, it would have a combine. The combine would carry the mail, baggage, express. Before there was UPS and FedEx and Amazon, there was the American Express Company. There were several railway express type companies. And this train is also flying a white flag on the front, indicating that it is an extra movement. Here's the depot in later years. I always tried to find a photo, whatever happened to these depots, you know, and in later years they were kind of left to just deteriorate. And here's Potomac in the last days. Next town, at milepost 2653, we're now coming into Armstrong, Illinois, named for H.T. Armstrong. This is a 1915 Vermilion County map of Armstrong. Now, Armstrong probably had a substantial depot at one time, but by the time people started taking photos, I have not found a picture of the original Armstrong depot. This looks like maybe a portion of it, or it might just be what they call a section house. Section house is where they would have the track laborers would have a car of some sort inside that building. They would roll it out on the track, go inspect the track. So that might have been a portion of the depot or just the labor track. But it did stick around, 1971. There's a photo of it. I understand the neighbors that lived behind it actually painted it for the bicentennial, put some stars on it and some red, you know, painted it up a little bit. It was still there in 1983 when this photo was taken. But by then, the pumpkin vine was pretty much done in 1980. Okay, so by this time the rails may still be in, but there had not been any train movement for a few years. Well, you all are familiar with some of the blizzards up here. And in April 6, 1920, between Armstrong and Penfield, these pictures were taken, and they're just trying to move snow on the line. There is the Chicago and Eastern Illinois Bridge at Penfield. The pumpkin vine went underneath it, and so they're trying to move some snow. I don't have newspaper accounts of this yet, but it was apparently a really bad snow. You can see the locomotives are getting literally buried in snow. And I came across several pictures. This is at Armstrong at milepost 2653. Here's just outside of Rantoul. They hit a snowdrift, I imagine, and the train just stopped. So if you're a passenger, you would have to be very patient until they could dig the train out. There's the combine car that carried the mail and the express, and they're stuck in the snow. That's somewhere east of Dewey. Here we are at Lotus, Illinois, where they crossed the Wabash. We'll talk more about that in a minute. You can see this train has a coach, and it looks like a caboose at the end. One more, a couple more here actually. April 6, 1920, east of Rantoul. 2 locomotives trying to fight the snow. Here's April 6th outside of Rantoul. Again, 2 more locomotives buried in the snow. And one more. The Rantoul Museum had this photo showing, this is near Rantoul, locomotive 1726, and again, looks like it has hit a snowdrift and probably just stopped. The goal was, of course, to get it looking like that. So, Penfield, next, Penfield, Illinois. Milepost 30.443, this is a Champaign County map on the left, and 1893 map, and then on the right, 1929 map. Penfield was laid out in 1876 and is named after Guy Daniel Penfield of Rantoul, Illinois. John Penfield was a leading financial backer of the railroad. And thriving grain and stock shipping centers were established every 4 to 5 miles east and west of Rantoul, thus greatly reducing the distance from farm to market over at that time, nearly impassable winter and spring roads. So the railroads opened up a lot of commerce. Towns like Penfield, Gifford, Dewey, Fisher became excellent market centers and rivaled each other in trade. In fact, I just learned today that they built a huge storage elevator on the Punkin Vine in Rantoul. I had seen pictures of this large structure. I didn't know what it was. And just today I learned that was a huge elevator basically to store grain as it came in on the Punkin Vine. Penfield. There's a picture of the depot, and a train stopped at the depot. Again, American Express. This is your express. The depot is where you got your telegraph, right? Telegram. You got your express shipments, you got your U.S. mail there. People would go in these little towns, when they would hear that lonesome whistle off in the distance, they would go to these depots just to see who's getting on, who's getting off the train. I mean, it was the hub of the community, huge. Here's a 1950. Believe it or not, they were still using steam locomotives up until about 1955 on the Punkin Vine. Of course, you know, they're standard gauge now. Here's a picture that was taken on October 3rd, 1950. The Penfield Depot, this was taken by a gentleman named Monty Powell, who was a native of Clinton, Illinois. Took some pictures of the old depots. This is probably in the 1940s. My good friend Jack Keefe, who lives in Bloomington, took pictures toward the end. This is 1966. You can see it's getting tagged, as they say in the graffiti world. A May 1978 article in the Rantoul Press talked about the line being up for abandonment. So they were talking about abandonment way back as early as 1978. But apparently during the harvest season, the Illinois Central Gulf had a shortage of hopper cars available for the elevators. The rest of the year, the line was very, very lightly used. The line's traffic was broken down by cars per mile per year. The unofficial benchmark to be profitable was 34 cars per mile per year on the line. So from Gifford to Potomac in 1974 and 1975, the average was only 21 cars per mile per year. And that, coupled with the deferred maintenance on the line, it was a losing proposition. And that's when my dad would stop and say, "Look, that's the Punkin Vine." And I would say, "Dad, those rails are terrible. I don't know how they get a train across it." Gifford, namesake of the founder, Benjamin Gifford, of the Havana, Rantoul, and Eastern. The station was located west of Main Street on the south of Center Street on the north side of the track. Compromise Township map. You can see the line coming across. It takes a little bit of a northwest turn at Gifford and then levels out again. Here's Gifford. This is looking north and west. This is from the 1975 Gifford Centennial book, and I'm going to quote. In the day, the depot to Gifford was what a modern airport is to a city. People arrived in town at the depot. People left town at the depot. There were tearful farewells and joyful reunions at the depot. Merchants looked to the depot for their new merchandise. If you ordered a corset or a cream separator from Sears Roebuck, you looked to the depot for its arrival. The mail arrived daily at the depot and telegrams were received there as well. There's Gifford. Another photo of Gifford. This is really interesting. In the background is the Railroad Hotel. It's kind of covered by trees. But you wonder about the people that worked on the line. How do you like this? A three-wheeled hand-car velocipede. So he'd pedal and hand car to make that, to propel that car where he could go and inspect the rails. Notice the milk cans by the depot. It was a busy, busy place of commerce. Here we are looking east at Gifford. This is a 1915 photo. You can see the elevator and the siding. Another photo of Gifford. This photo is really interesting. This is 1917, and the only thing it says on the back of this photo is when John Jenkins' son Earl went off to World War I. So look at the flags, the band, the people, probably the whole community showed up for that special time. November 27th, 1966, this is what the Gifford Depot looked like. As far as I know, it does not exist anymore. We're going to go to Dillsburg next. This is milepost 3742. This was named after Mr. S. Dill, the first agent at the station. I have not come across a photo of the Dillsburg. So maybe somebody's got one up in their attic somewhere that they will pull down and donate to a museum. But no photos of the Dillsburg depot. Now we're coming into Rantoul. Rantoul, of course, was named after Robert Rantoul Jr., one of the incorporators of the Illinois Central. This map is the official railroad map dated September 16, 1911. Rantoul benefited directly as the central point of the Punkin Vine, where the roundhouse and the offices were, and trains running daily east and west. Here's where they had a turntable to turn the locomotives around. They had a 4-stall roundhouse, and they had some shop buildings to do maintenance on the locomotives. This is just a 1913 plat that shows basically the same thing. Here's the roundhouse. If you're familiar with Rantoul, the depot is down here, okay? This is a 1924 Sanborn map just showing a little more detail about the roundhouse, the turntable, the tool house, the blacksmith shop, the trainmen. They probably employed 20 or 30 men at this shop for the Punkin Vine. Here's a postcard that actually shows the interlocking tower at that point. There's the roundhouse and some of the associated buildings, the water tank. It was closed. The tower here was closed in the 1930s. Zoomed in a little bit, you can see a little bit more. This is from the Rantoul Museum, the powerhouse, where they had some machinery that would supply power to all their mechanical devices they used back in the day. Here's an aerial view showing the roundhouse. So this aerial view has to be pre-1950. The roundhouse, the railroad quit using steam locomotives by 1955, and the roundhouse was torn down about that time. So by 1955 or so, this might be the early 50s when this aerial was taken. Here's some photos. These are all from the Rantoul Museum, and wonderful photos, early photos. We're talking, around 1900 of the Shortline or the Punkin Vine in Rantoul. And you can see the locomotives. They would go to the water tanks to fill up their water for their boiler. Here, they're coal burners. You can see a pile of coal here. Here's a locomotive that apparently hit some snow and tipped over at Rantoul. I don't have exact dates on some of these. I'm willing to bet there was a gentleman named Otho Covert, and he lived in Fisher. And he took photos of the trains, but he knew the crew members by name, and he would get them to line up and pose. So I bet that's an Otho Covert photo. I don't know that for sure. But here's some of the crew lined up. This is at Rantoul. Again, this would have been around turn of the century. Here's what your Punkin Vine passenger train looked like. You've got your locomotive there. That one's actually got a bit of a snowplow on the front. And then you've got your combine car, your United States Mail, your express, baggage, and then your coach. And that's basically what the train consisted of throughout that era. Here we are in Rantoul with another one of the locomotives. This is kind of interesting. This was in Rantoul, and I don't know the story here, but there was Central Refining Company that is some kind of an oil tank car that they have brought in. You can see the oil drums there on the ground. Here we are at the Roundhouse in Rantoul. Here's one of the more familiar locomotives was the number 442. You see a lot of pictures of 442 on the Punkin vine. So this is 1948, the 442. Here's the 442 on the turntable in Rantoul. They're getting ready to turn the locomotive around, maybe put it in the shop. Here's the 733. This is 1951. So they were still in the early 50s running some steam locomotives. October 20th, 1951, the 719 at Rantoul. Here's one more, October 22nd, 1953. And that's the oldest photo I have of, or I say oldest, the youngest photo I should say, of a steam locomotive in Rantoul. Now here's something, I'm going to throw this in kind of as a side note. Did you know Rantoul once had an interurban? It wasn't the Illinois terminal like was here in Champaign, but it was called the Kankakee and Urbana Traction Company. It began operations on December 20th, 1912, and served Urbana, Thomasboro, Rantoul, Ludlow, and made it all the way to Paxton on a 27-mile system. It was discontinued March 26, 1926. So from the time it was completed about 1916, it was done for by 1926. So about a 10-year window. So a lot of people don't remember this, but it was called the University Route. Of course, started here in Champaign. And you can see the schedule, and they ran a lot of trains. These are all the southbound trains, and there's all the northbound trains over there. Quite an interesting little line for a while. When they built it, they used a steam locomotive, and they had to hang the catenary so they could run the electric motors. They built a depot in Rantoul. In January 1915, they released plans for this new station. The contract to build it was not let until June of 1915, but it called for a 20 by 50 foot brick building costing about $3,000 with a waiting room in the front. It's long gone, and I'm not even sure exactly where it sat in Rantoul, but there's a picture of a car arriving at that station. I did find a map from 1924 showing the station here, and there was the Chanute Hotel. So Chandler, and then I don't know what the other street might be, Sangamon, but I don't know. I tried to look it up on Google Earth, and I couldn't even. Chandler was way out past the old air base, so I don't know. I got lost. But anyway, so here we are at the depot in Rantoul. You can see those cars were rather nice little cars and probably well traveled in that 10-year period. So that's the Kankakee and Urbana Traction. Next, we're going to go to Prospect, Illinois, and then Tomlinson at milepost 4573, named for the business partner of Lewis Hicks of Rantoul. Then we go to Dewey. This was named for Milo Dewey of Plano, a large stockholder and treasurer of the railroad. This is a 1929 Champaign County map. The station was located west of Main Street and south of 2nd Street on the south side of the track. One of the earliest photos I have of the Punkin vine is this photo right here, taken about 1890. They were standard gauge by that time, but that was a very early American type locomotive, 440 locomotive. And also the coupling system was link and pin, not the Janney couplers like we see today. Link and pin was how many a railroader lost digits. They could say, back then you knew who an experienced railroader was by the number of fingers he was missing. Okay, it was a very dangerous job, coupling. Dewey, Illinois. This is not 1890. That's a mistake on the photo there. But this is probably in the 1940s, a Monty Powell photo. I don't have many photos of the interior, but here's one of the agent at Dewey. This is Philip Hitchens, who is the IC agent at Dewey. 1965, the Dewey station looked like so. But you know, that line still is intact from Rantoul to Dewey. They serve an elevator there, and it's now called Premier Cooperative, and they had this locomotive was an actual Illinois Central locomotive that they had bought. It was a classic. There weren't many of these built. It was called a GP28, and they just upgraded to a more modern locomotive. And I asked the guy, what happened to that? He says, I think they took it and scrapped it. And I thought, oh, I wish it had gone to Monticello.
We turned it down.
Yeah.
Oh, you turned it down?
It was too rough.
Oh, it was.
It would not be worth saving.
Oh, okay, there we go.
They got every last penny's use out of it.
Okay, they squeezed all the orangeness out of this engine they could. Remember, this is the Punkin vine, right? So here we go. Next is Fisher, Illinois, named for Robert Fisher, a major stockholder and vice president of the railroad. And here you can see a map of Fisher. Now, I haven't found the newspaper article for this yet, but I'm going to find it. Somewhere around 1910, there was a head-on collision. This is probably one of the worst wrecks on the line. It was a freight train that hit a passenger train head-on, or vice versa. And you can see the passenger engine is the engine you see on the far right there. And you can see how it shoved the tender of that engine into the cab. If the crew had not jumped, and I don't know if they jumped and survived, but if they didn't jump, they were probably crushed to death and scalded by steam. So this is some pictures of that accident. So that's still a work in progress to find out what happened there and were there fatalities. I don't know. Otho Covert, this is Fisher, Illinois, one of his earliest photos, 1917. And notice he would have the crew pose. So as you see these photos here, over the years, you can see the crew posing. And a lot of times at the bottom of his picture, he'd put the names of the crewmen. So these are just Otho Covert photos that he took. This is 1926. Here's 1940 with the 442 locomotive. Here we go, 1940, and these are all Fisher. Now, if you want to know some names, this is an interesting picture that was published in one of the newspapers, and I'm sorry I don't have the name of the newspaper, but representing almost 240 years in railroading from left, Art Johnson, Gordon Douglas, Harry Kaler, Tom Evans, and R.E. Smith working on locomotive number 401 on the Shortline. When I presented in Rantoul Tuesday night, Mr. Kaler's relative was there, and I'm actually going to send him these pictures. Fisher, Illinois, over the Sangamon River. They built this trestle pretty strong to handle flood conditions, and you can see these are 1918 photos, but it held up pretty good through some flood stages. Fisher, Illinois Depot. Fortunately, we have a color photo of December 1964, Fisher. That's looking down toward the Fisher Depot, December 1964. And by 1966, there's your Fisher Depot. I imagine the agencies closed about this time. And then they would go to what they call traveling agents. And so instead of every town having their own depot agent, I guess with cars and roads being improved, they would have an agent that would travel from place to place. Yes, sir?
They were still an agent there in 1966.
In 1966, there was still an agent at Fisher. Thank you, thank you. Then we come to a place called Lotus, Illinois, where the Punkin Vine crosses over into McLean County. At Lotus, they had a tower, and as I was driving here today, I came up to Lodge, if you know where Lodge is at. I came up to Lodge, and I could look up toward Lotus, and here came a train. On the Norfolk Southern now operates this. That used to be the Wabash line from St. Louis to Chicago. That was very, very busy, and part of it's been cut off now. But that was very busy. So they later took down the tower and put in this little building, and this little building still stands. It's been moved away from the tracks, but this is 1971. There's the little Lotus building and the train order board, and somebody in Lotus has actually moved that little building off the rails there. So that little building stands. Now, this building here is very special to me because my father was born in Glenavon, and he would tell me he would walk down the Punkin Vine to a place called Lorette. And for the longest time, I found this photo years ago through the Illinois Central Historical Archives. January 1903, this photo was taken at Lorette. Well, I don't know if you remember in the beginning of my presentation, I told you the name of Benjamin Gifford's wife. Her name was Laura Etta Martindale. So that's how this place got its name. This is where the Punkin Vine crossed the Gilman to St. Louis line, the line that went from Chicago to St. Louis. This is where they crossed at Lorette. That depot burned down at least twice. One time it burned down because there was lightning in the area, and the lightning hit the telegraph line. The telegraph line goes into the depot, and it started a fire and burned the depot down. By the way, that was not uncommon back in the day. Here we are at Lorette in 1930s. My friend Jack Keefe had this rare photo of them switching. By this time, it's mixed train service, so you have your freight cars, and then you have your passenger cars at the end. And it was a slow going because the train had to switch at these different locations, and when you didn't know what time you would get to your destination. Somebody might say that's like Amtrak today, but anyway, here is Glenavon. Now, let me show you this. The railroad comes across, kind of jogs north, crosses at Lorette, right there where it crossed. This is the Chicago to St. Louis line. Then it heads up to Glenavon. I was looking at a plat. This is McLean County. I was looking at a plat of Glenavon, and I don't know if you can see the name, but that's my last name. M is Marcellus, who was my great-grandfather. He had that 160-acre plot of land, and that's where my dad was born, on that farm, and he could see the Punkin Vine as a kid. Here's Glenavon. They didn't really have a depot. They had more like a boxcar with a roof on it. Here's the Salt Creek Bridge after a flood in 1956, moved the tracks completely off of the trestle. Here's Sabina. We're coming into Sabina now. You might remember this town was named after Mrs. Sabina Moore, the wife of Joseph G. Moore, who was instrumental in the town's creation. The town was established in 1878, again, because of the railroad. And here is a wonderful picture of the 442 that was taken by Otho Covert passing the Sabina Depot, which used to be the Henning Depot, which we saw earlier in the presentation. The depot does not look in good shape, even in the 1940s. I don't think it lasted long. By April 1956, the railroad's using diesels now. Here is the first picture I have on the Punkin Vine of a diesel. It's a little switch engine. This is at Sabina. The depot's gone by this time, as you can see. Now we're coming into our terminus. We're almost at the end of the line here. LeRoy, Illinois. This is just a map showing the line coming in. This is the Peoria and Eastern line, which was the line that went from Peoria to Indianapolis. It was the New York Central, part of the New York Central system, the Big Four. So LeRoy looked like this. They had a turntable, they had an engine house, and they would come in and over here and connect with the Big Four, the Chicago, Cleveland, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. That's why people, even to this day, people refer to it as the Big Four. But it became the Peoria and Eastern, which is a subsidiary of the New York Central. I know that's a mouthful, but anyway. So here they had their roundhouse. They had a single stall. They had a little depot. Here's an aerial view. This is after the roundhouse has been torn down, but there's the turntable because they still had to turn the locomotive around. And there's the depot. That depot sat and languished for years. The city had in 1985 their sesquicentennial, and a gentleman drew where everything used to be. I did a little trick where I took a Sanborn fire insurance map and then overlaid it onto a Google Earth image. And so I can see now where the buildings were, because there's new buildings that have been built where the old buildings were. So you can kind of see where it's at. This is the roundhouse, or I say roundhouse. This is the engine house and the turntable. This was what's called an Armstrong H framed 52-foot wooden gallows turntable that was built in 1878 that you see there. They later replaced it with this. Well, that's the old turntable. They later replaced it with this turntable, which is still Armstrong, meaning it wasn't motorized. You had to get a bunch of people on these big poles on either side and the key was to get the locomotive balanced in the middle. If you could get the locomotive balanced in the middle, then they could turn it by hand. It's called Armstrong. Here's the LeRoy Depot, 1903. The Rantoul Museum, I just found this photo of a train coming into LeRoy back in the day. This is the little girl there. This was taken in 1918. And the little girl there is Vera Grady. Vera Grady. So, inside the depot in 1917, this is November the 2nd, 1917, inside the LeRoy Depot, little train coming down the Punkin vine into LeRoy. Here's just a picture at the turntable, water tank, showing the 2 cars that were used, again, the Baggage Express mail car and the coach. On January 6, 1939, there was a Civilian Conservation Corps train that came in or departed from, I know they had a CCC camp real close to LeRoy, so this may have been a group of the CCC boys heading out via train. But somebody got some pictures. Oh, this is Otho Covert again. He got pictures of the train in LeRoy. It's probably one of the last big things that happened. Besides this, west of Barnett Street in 1964, my late friend Skip Luke said only a tree or pole kept that engine from rolling into the backyard of a house on the north side of town. He said she was leaning pretty far over against the pole. They brought in a crane, lifted her back up, put her on the rails, and continued. Just about done, but I want to just tell you, are y'all familiar with the Monticello Railroad Museum? If you haven't been there, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. If you're a railroad buff in any way, shape, or form, it's a must-see place. Wonderful. Before that museum was started, there was Ted Lehman. Is that how you pronounce his last name? Lehman. There was Ted Lehman actually talked to the Illinois Central about purchasing a part of this, because the railroad was ready to abandon this portion in LeRoy, and to purchase a portion of this railroad to start the museum. And so it almost had a museum. Here's what it looked like in 1966. Ted Lehman took this photo as he was scouting it out. But as it turns out, they wouldn't abandon that line into LeRoy until 1980. On the Rantoul District, 1963, a list of some of the depot agents: H.L. Sink, P.E. Pruitt, T. Swindle, I believe that'd be Tom Swindle, and G.R. Gibson. By 1967, a Mr. H.H. Hildebrand, who's well known in the Rantoul area, was a traveling agent, and then a Mr. G.R. Gibson was the agent at Rantoul in 1967. What happened to the depot? Well, it sat there and it languished for some time. Arsonists got it by 1976, and it was torn down. So in 1976, this just shows you what the Punkin vine looked like. It was like, that's an Illinois Central caboose going through a jungle. In 1972, the Illinois Central merged with the Gulf Mobile in Ohio to create the Illinois Central Gulf. The Illinois Central Gulf petitioned to abandon the remainder of the Punkin vine, and the last train ran in March of 1980, and thereafter the line was soon removed. As you see in LeRoy here, they've already started tearing out the tracks. But there is one silver lining on the cloud of the Punkin vine, and that is a short segment of the Punkin vine survives today as that premier cooperative line branch from Rantoul west to Dewey. And not only do they have a portion of that line still very much in service, they actually have an Illinois Central caboose. You don't see cabooses anymore active on railroads. You see them in parks, right? But this caboose, all the doors have been welded, the windows have been closed. They use it as what's called a shoving platform. When they have to shove a train backwards, they have to have somebody to protect the crossings and whatnot. So they call it a shoving platform, but it is an actual Illinois Central caboose. That means Cinderella has turned into a pumpkin vine. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.